and move forward. So evolution. And I think Darwin unfortunately had an incomplete view of the world because of when he lived. The picture you see behind the letters is what he saw when he looked at a cell. And it looks just like a blob of something, right? I mean, that's what he had to work with. And he wrote this in the Origin of Life, or in the Origin of the Species book. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ exists which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. I don't believe there's any scientist that believes this anymore, because there are so many things that we've seen that cannot be broken into their pieces. And in fact, things have to come into existence simultaneously. Most science just accepts that it did, but they don't have a mechanism for it anymore. Because you look at the human cell, it doesn't make any sense. But that I've said that, I know I'm going to get comments. And the comments are going to say, but they always go to this. Anybody know what the Dover trial was? Dover trial, this is December of 2004. The ACLU sued Dover, Pennsylvania School District to remove teaching of intelligent design from the classrooms as an alternative to evolution. And they won. And they argued that intelligent design was a religious idea and that should not be taught in the school system. So instead, the naturalism, godless religion is the one that's taught. This is not separation of church and state. Our Constitution was the idea that the government should not tell you how you should practice your religion. It had nothing to do with ideas in the public square. But unfortunately, we have allowed, and this is only 20 years ago, we have allowed this to take place in America. So when you make a comment, people will throw things like this. I had a comment on the internet about this. Basically, it's like, you don't understand. The Dover trial ended that argument forever. It's like, it's a trial by a judge who I disagree with. It didn't end anything other than it was very sad for the people that live in the school district in Pennsylvania. But people are going to throw stuff like this at you when you start making arguments about their evidence, because they don't have any evidence. So what do? They try to argue against the concept. And, well, like I said, if you're not knowledgeable about what they're throwing at you, you don't know what it is that they're throwing. But the bottom line is, this is what a typical living cell looks like. And it is incredibly complex. Do you guys know who Michael Behe is? He's a part of the Discovery Institute. He's a Christian. And he put up, I was going to give you this example, but it's kind of long. He used a mousetrap to demonstrate how a cell cannot be reduced to pieces. A mousetrap is made out of 7 different components. You take any one of those components away, it no longer would function as a mousetrap. You have the base, you have the spring, you have the little tension bar, the hammer. So you take any one of those pieces away and it doesn't function as a mousetrap anymore. He got hammered by the atheist because of that example, because they said, well, it doesn't have to be a mousetrap. It could be something else, and then it evolved into a mousetrap. But the question they can't answer is, okay, I'll take this cell. What can I take out of it and it still function like a cell? I mean, frankly, as you remove things from this living cell, that ceases to be a living cell anymore. It dies. If I gave them all the components that you see, even as they're constructed, they couldn't make a cell. Okay, they can't take the components and then make a living cell out of it. They've tried this resurrection idea several times with failure. You cannot remove if I take the nucleus out of a cell, do you think it would function? Well, it wouldn't replicate, so it wouldn't actually qualify as life anymore. I mean, there's really no part of a human cell you can remove and have it meet the criteria for life. It won't be able to reproduce, or it won't be able to grow, or it won't be able to function. It will die, so things can change, but you did the changing by taking things out of it. It's disingenuous for people to say because a judge said so or a scientist says so, it can happen, because they can't prove it and there's no evidence of it. But I want to just give you guys a taste of what's inside the cell. And I'm going to show you some videos that were made for science class. These are not Christian videos, okay? So keep in mind, this is not Christian. This is just science.
These are tiny molecular machines, and they are doing this inside your body right now. To understand why, we have to zoom out. Every day in an adult human body, 50 to 70 billion of your cells die. Either they're stressed or damaged or just old. But this is normal. In fact, it's called programmed cell death. But to make up for all these lost cells, right now, billions of your cells are dividing, essentially creating new cells. And that process of cell division, also called mitosis, well, it requires an army of tiny molecular machines. So let's take a closer look. DNA is a good place to start, the double helix molecule we always talk about. This is a scientifically accurate depiction of DNA created by Drew Barry at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute of Medical Research. If you unwind the two strands, you can see that each has a sugar phosphate backbone connected to the sequence of nucleic acid base pairs, known by the letters A, T, G, and C. Now the strands run in opposite directions, which is important when you go to copy DNA. Copying DNA is one of the first steps in cell division. Here, the two strands of DNA are being unwound and separated by the tiny blue molecular machine called helicase. Helicase literally spins as fast as a jet engine. The strand of DNA on the right has its complementary strand assembled continuously, but the other strand is more complicated because it runs in the opposite direction. So it must be looped out with its complementary strand assembled in reverse, section by section. At the end of this process, you have two identical DNA molecules, each one a few centimeters long, but just a couple nanometers wide. So to prevent the DNA from becoming a tangled mess, it is wrapped around proteins called histones, forming a nucleosome. These nucleosomes are bundled together into a fiber known as chromatin, which is further looped and coiled to form a chromosome, one of the largest molecular structures in your body. You can actually see chromosomes under a microscope in dividing cells. Only then do they take on their characteristic shape. Otherwise, the DNA is more strewn inside the nucleus. The process of dividing a cell takes around an hour in mammals, so this footage is from a time-lapse. You can see how the chromosomes line up on the equator of the cell. Now, when everything is right, they are pulled apart into the two new daughter cells, each one containing an identical copy of DNA. Now, as simple as this looks, the process is incredibly complicated and requires even more fascinating molecular machines to accomplish it. So let's look at a single chromosome. One chromosome consists of two sausage-shaped chromatids, containing the identical copies of DNA made earlier. Each chromatid is attached to microtubule fibers, which guide and help align them in the correct position. The microtubules are connected to the chromatid at the kinetochore, here colored red. The kinetochore consists of hundreds of different proteins working together to achieve multiple objectives. In fact, it's one of the most sophisticated molecular mechanisms inside your body. The kinetochore is central to the successful separation of the chromatids. It creates a dynamic connection between the chromosome and the microtubules. For a reason no one's yet been able to figure out, the microtubules are constantly being built at one end and deconstructed at the other. While the chromosome is still getting ready, the kinetochore sends out a chemical stop signal to the rest of the cell, shown here by the red molecules, basically saying this chromosome is not yet ready to divide. The kinetochore also mechanically senses tension. When the tension is just right and the position and attachment are correct, all the proteins get ready, shown here by turning green. At this point, the stop signal broadcasting system is not switched off. Instead, it is literally carried away from the kinetochore down the microtubules by a dynein motor. That's the walking guy. This is really what it looks like. It has long legs so it can avoid obstacles and step over the kinesins, molecular motors that walk in the opposite direction.
Personally, I'm astounded by these tiny molecular machines.
So that's just a taste of the complexity inside. That's just the nucleus of your cell. You think about it being a pile of goo, what Darwin imagined. If he'd known that, I don't think he'd have come up with the origin of the species. I really don't. I mean, the complexity is so much. It's, in order to believe essentially what Darwin wrote, you have to ignore the evidence. I mean, you have to put yourself back in Darwin's time period where you can ignore that complexity, because I mean that's just amazing. I mean these animations are really useful because you can actually see what things look like. Like I said, that's not a Christian thing. That's how they teach the science now, is with some of these models. And you know, it does not matter how much education someone has. What was it they say, Joy? It's stupid things said by smart people is still stupid. Nonsense spoken by really smart people is.
Scientists or whatever is still nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't matter the source, it matters the content. And you can't be too excited about how many doctorate degrees somebody have. I mean, I have 2, and you don't trust me. Look at the evidence, okay? I mean, my degrees have nothing to do with whether I actually am telling you the truth. The evidence points. And the complexity is just, oh, it's just remarkable. No? You raise your hand. And in mammal cells or animal cells are just the beginning. You know, I think plant cells are even more remarkable. We often take for granted, we have consciousness. That's outside of the workings of the cell, but we're consumers. We need plant cells that make energy for us to live. The evolutionary model, it's like, okay, what started, the chicken or the egg, right? I mean, the consumers can't start, or there's nothing for them to eat, but there's no way that you can start a way that you could produce food in stepwise incremental parts. It's just impossible. I mean, we learned about this in high school chemistry, right? It's consumers and producers. You got the photosynthesis, and there's a perfect balance we talked about earlier between the consumers and the producers. There has to be. Now, there is another model, deep in really deep sea locations near volcanic vents. There's another method of generating energy from the environment called chemosynthesis, and this is what they glom onto, is this is the method. But how do you get from there to the surface? And the way the energy is generated there, that it's not really useful to us. And energy is not the key here. They'll say all you have to do is harness energy for a living cell to work. And I saw an example the other day. We were watching a little cartoon that was trying to explain this. It's like, okay, I have my cell phone, and I need to charge it. So I need to put energy into the cell phone to charge it. My grill has all kinds of energy. I cooked food on it. So if I toss my cell phone on the grill, what's going to happen? Well, it's not going to charge the battery, right? Because energy itself is not the answer. It has to be useful energy. And it has to be directed in a way that the device or the cell can actually use it. And that's what's lost on almost all these concepts. It's like, oh, there's plenty of energy in the volcanic vents. Oh, okay, it's heat, I get it. But that's not useful energy. How do I transfer that energy into a living cell in any kind of a useful way? I mean, those protocells that we talked about, they would melt. Okay, there are a whole series of protective aspects that these living organisms that live in these volcanic vents have to have in order for them to survive. And again, how did they come into existence? And so I always go back to, again, high school chemistry, and they got the mechanism of photosynthesis. I find it's just amazing. I mean, only God can come up with such a concept that the sun sends light and then somehow the plant traps carbon from the environment and puts it into a form that I can eat. I mean, it's amazing. But I want to show you guys a video that is trying to demonstrate what that energy process is in the cell, and then they're going to show you photosynthesis. And I have to admit, I was just blown away. These animations are just amazing.
Ultimately, 3 carbons enter in the form of pyruvate and 3 carbons exit in the form of 3 CO2 molecules. Whether it's a negative pushing or a positive pulling potential. ATP synthase is a large protein complex composed of 4 parts. As this cycle repeats, the reaction center continues to deposit protons into the thylakoid lumen. Photosystems capture photons of light from the sun Because the thylakoid membrane is packed with photosystems and chloroplasts are packed with grana, chloroplasts appear green. All of the events of photosynthesis occur in chloroplasts. However, it's worthwhile to have a quick look at how plant cells are arranged within the leaf of a plant, because this is relevant to the process of photosynthesis.
And we can't reproduce it. We've tried. That's what we try to do with our photocells. And it's microscopic, and it's just amazing. I mean, these animations I find just amazing because they show you in such detail what we know. We were taught this, but it's always nice to see visuals. So again, you come back to this, like, what does this evidence show me? We understand the complexity of this mechanism. Which part can we take away and it function? And that's what the evolutionist has to answer that question. Okay, they don't have evidence for what they say, because if it didn't all happen at once, then the system doesn't seem to work this way. And where is the progression that there has to be if evolution is true? The key is you just got to look at the evidence. And